One copyright claim from Fusion later, and I'm back with the newest episode. This one goes right up my alley with the whole branding and rebranding bit, so let's blow this thing wide open, shall we? Okay, so just before we go any further, as I mentioned in the intro, Fusion filed a copyright claim against my last video. Now, while I think this is nothing more than a way to try and silence an opposing opinion by denying me the funds from the video's monetization, I still have to follow YouTube's system of filing disputes, so I probably won't have any news on that issue for the next, 3 weeks or so. What I will say is that I believe that this video, any future videos, and all previous videos fall under fair use, and that my use of copyrighted material is not infringing upon their rights in any way, shape, and or form. My work is transformative, it provides critique, analysis, and by the end of the video, any borrowed material makes up such a minor shred of it. So, moving forward, hashtag fair use.
People call the United States the Great Melting Pot. Everyone of all races, creeds, and colors are equal in their hatred of Arabs.
Hey, Basim. Psst. Hey, remember what we talked about regarding generalizations and how they're a bad thing? No? Well, let me jog your memory. Basim, you're being a race-baiting piece of shit right now. Full stop. Your branding of everyone in the United States as equally biased against Arabs is beyond ignorant. I know you'll hide behind the guise of, it's just satire, but it sounds more like an intentional dog whistle intended to hound anyone to the political right of your position, which is pretty much any true centrist or beyond. Alright, enough schooling on how terrible it is to be a dog whistle race baiter. Let's get back to the rest of this dog and pony show.
Only half of you liked us back in 2010, and by 2015, it's only gotten worse.
Yeah, okay, 2 points here, Basim. 1, citation fucking needed. I don't know where you're getting your numbers, as you don't even give the name or publisher of the study in your video. For all anyone knows, you're just picking numbers that you think are egregious enough to generate a reaction, but not so extreme as to create any legitimate amount of skepticism. Well, I guess you didn't count on the rational-minded, did you? Ante up on those citations, or get the fuck out of here with your hollow numbers. 2. Now, I'd hate to sound like an unmitigated bigot, but I will settle for being called a mitigated one. Basim, do you not think there's anything going on in the world that might color the opinions of those living in Western nations regarding Arab immigrants? I know you make the distinction between Arabs and Middle Eastern people later in your video, as you seek to distance yourself from the Afghans and Iranians, okay, Persians, whatever. But even if I were to give you all of those, you still need to deal with Syria being officially known as the Syrian Arab Republic, so you're going to need to swallow that little tidbit when I ask this question. If you want to look at polls regarding the outlook of American citizens on people from the Arab nations, you're going to need to deal with criticisms of Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, and Iraq, none of whom are exactly in the world's best graces right now. Whether you want to look at the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria seeking to convert people around the world to Islam and turn them against their own countries, or if you want to look at Lebanon's persecution of pretty much anyone who isn't Muslim, especially the Jews. Remember, this is the nation whose athletes refuse to even ride on the same bus at the Rio Games as the Jewish athletes. And Egypt, whose male judoka, under pressure from the Egyptian people and government, refused to shake the hand of or bow to his Israeli opponent after losing a match. By the way, his bigoted ass just got sent home from the games by the IOC for being such an intolerant prick. Basim, if you want to talk about intolerance, I think you're going to need to do a little bit of self-reflection by looking in the mirror, or at least back at the country you came from. Moving on.
We're not just unpopular here, we're considered an eminent threat.
Yeah, you are. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that so many people from Arab nations follow an ideology that so vehemently opposes the vast majority of modern Western values. I'm sorry that gays in Arab nations risk criminal prosecution, often punishable by death for being who they are. I'm sorry that your nations treat their women as a second class of citizen considered to be below men in the eyes of the law. I'm sorry that your region seems to be constantly embroiled in some stupid conflict over different interpretations of a book, and not just where you have verbal debates about the merits of beating your wives, but where you shoot people who disagree with your side of the argument. I'm not going to replay that whole bagging out your old team clip from Bering quite so soon. I don't want the big hairy cunt thinking I've got a hard-on for his comedy shtick. Though, it is good shtick. But holy shit, Bassam, you're really not getting the point here.
And the horrific shooting in Orlando only made things worse.
This is where I think you've missed the boat, Bassam. You see, it's not Arabs that make US citizens feel uneasy, but rather Muslims that they're so skeptical about. The issue that you're running into here is that the vast majority of Arabs also happen to be Muslim. So you're going to point out later that Afghans are not Arabs, and so I don't really get how you can bring up the Afghani-American Orlando shooter, say that things have gotten worse for Arabs since that shooting, and not see the common thread here. It's not they come from this geographical region, hate them, but rather this geographical region seems to have a serious issue with human rights and endemic violence and unrest. Perhaps we should be a little more cautious about people coming from this particular region other than less turbulent areas of the world. Do you see the difference now? No, of course you don't. Wait a second here. Let's roll that back.
Even though the overwhelming majority of Muslims deplore what happened as much as the rest of you.
Yep, as I thought. Even Bassam chooses to conflate Arabs with Muslims whenever it suits his needs. I don't understand how it's okay for the left to chew people out for using Muslims, Arabs, and basically any reference to the Middle East interchangeably. But when they do it, it's supposed to just be understood that what they're actually saying is X, Y, and Z. The rules are not one for me, another for thee, but rather universal. If you want to be able to swap out the terms at a whim, then anyone else can do it just the same. Just keep tabs on how often he'll switch between references that are legitimately Arab and ones that the majority of people just lump together, while simultaneously admonishing the people who make the same generalizations when their views don't align with his.
But despite that, 60% of Republicans think it's perfectly acceptable to spy on us.
I'm going to play a brief clip here. It's one you may have seen from such YouTubers as Sargon of Akkad. When it comes to mainstream Muslims, I don't think you're using the same definition of majority as the rest of the English-speaking world. If you take a look at where the majority of Muslims live, and then poll them on their opinions, you'll start getting some really shocking numbers. Roll clip.
Can we have the camera? Can we have this camera focusing on all the audience, sir? Can we have this camera focusing on all the audience? Because every now and then, every time we have a conference, every time we invite a speaker, they always can come with the same accusations. This speaker supports death penalty for homosexuals. This speaker supports death penalty for this crime or that. He is homophobic. They subjugate women, etc., etc., etc. It's the same old stuff coming all the time. And we always try to tell them, I always try to tell them that, look, it's not that speaker that we're inviting who has these extreme radical views, as you say. These are general views that every Muslim actually has. Every Muslim believes in these things. Just because they're not telling you about it, or just because they're not out there in the media, doesn't mean they don't believe in them. So I will ask you, everyone in the room, how many of you are normal Muslims? You're not extremists, you're not radical, just normal Sunni Muslims. Please raise your hands. Everybody, mashallah, subhanallah. Okay, take down your hands again. How many of you agree that men and women should sit separate? Please raise your hands.
Sisters in particular.
Everyone agree. Everyone agree. Brothers and sisters, Subhanallah. So it's not just these radical sheikhs then. Allahu Akbar. Next question. How many of you agree that the punishments described in the Quran and the Sunnah, whether it is death, whether it is stoning for adultery, whatever it is, if it is from Allah and His Messenger, that is the best punishment ever possible for humankind, and that is what we should apply in the world? Who agrees with that? Allahu Akbar. Are you all radical extremists? Subhanallah. So all of you are saying that you are common Muslims, you all go to the different masajid Norway, or are you like a specific sect, like the Islam net sect or anything like that? Are you like that? No. Are you like that? Please raise your hand if you're like this extreme Islam net sect or anything like that. No one. Allahu Akbar. How many of you just go to these normal masajids in Norway, the normal Sunni mosques? Please raise your hands. Allahu Akbar. So what's the politicians gonna say now? What's the media gonna say now? That we're all extremists? We're all radicals? We need to deport all of us from this country?
So yeah, not exactly something that is denounced or shouted down amongst Muslims. The Orlando shooter, in carrying out his attack, was obeying the punishment for homosexuals in the Quran, which is death. So I wonder, why is it, Bassem, that people might see things like this and be concerned about the ideological differences between themselves and mainstream Islam? And then you swap out profiling and spying, which are two entirely different things. If I see a guy walking down the street at night in a neighborhood known for drugs, and I see him using a pair of cell phones, wearing sagged pants, a crooked red snapback, and dropping a red bandana from his back pocket, am I going to say, "Oh, look at that poor fellow, he must be lost"? Or am I going to say, "Bet you that guy's here either to score or sell drugs"? If you pick the second option, you're guilty of profiling, and that's a horrible thing. Or so the left would have you believe. Personally, I just say that's calling a spade a spade. If it waddles like a duck, quacks like a duck, and looks like a duck, it would not be entirely unreasonable to ask yourself, "Hey, I wonder, is that a duck?"
We're here protesting Syrian refugees coming to America, protesting the Islamization of America.
So right now for Arabs in America, the outlook is bleak.
Arabs or Muslims, Bassem? To which group are you referring right now? The man in the video said that they were protesting what they see to be the Islamization of America, not the Arabianizing of America. Can we not agree on a couple of basic terms here? Can we not just use the English language as it has been laid out by the dictionary? No, of course not, because words can mean whatever they want them to mean until those meanings don't lend themselves to a leftist agenda. Of course.
But that can change. America is the land of reinvention.
Yeah, of course it can change. People can change. Ideologies can change. But these things take time and more substantial efforts than just saying, "Hey, look, it's different now, I promise." Bassem, if the overall image of Muslims, Arabs, Afghans, Iranians, whichever group you want to use, if the perception is going to change, it is going to require a restructuring of the fundamental values upon which those societies function.
Rebranding a whole ethnicity is pretty ambitious.
I'll say it is. Holy shit. Best of luck if you think you're going to turn this franchise around, but hey, there's no harm in trying, right?
So I decided to start small, as in rebranding this Arab. I decided to consult with an expert in this area. Meet Kevin Walker.
Hi there, Kev. How's it going? I hope you're here to provide us all with some very insightful observations about how in the world we might be able to get Bassem, I'm a well-to-do surgeon and media personality, Youssef, to be seen as a less terroristy individual. But you're probably just going to choke on your own tongue and trip over your own feet for fear of being called a racist.
I have a branding consultancy called Boardwalk. We've been in business since 1990.
So, Kevin here has been in the game a while, ever since before he went into college, helping out his then employer with rebranding the gift shop he worked at. Since its inception, BBS has worked on projects for Tony Hawk, Honda Racing, the AIDS Research Alliance, and the Santa Monica Pier. So yeah, it looks like Bassam's finally found himself a qualified expert to interview, rather than a group's PR rep talking about issues in which they have a vested interest. You can see that video by clicking on the picture-in-picture card here. Alright, now back to the interview.
Can you give me some examples of things that have been rebranded?
A good example right now is SeaWorld.
A class action lawsuit against the theme park claims thousands of guests would never have set foot inside if they knew how the killer whales were being treated.
SeaWorld just decided to stop,
Killing whales.
well, owning them, keeping them in captivity.
Yeah.
The audience had grown out of this maritime circus act.
And, just like spectators have grown out of taking enjoyment from the inhumane treatment of killer whales, the Western world has moved beyond its barbaric stage and decided that killing political opponents and gays is wrong, as is the subjugation of women both legally and culturally. Now we just want Islam and Islamic countries to hustle up and keep pace with the Western world's values. Why is that so hard to understand?
What about people? Can people be rebranded?
Oh yeah, you can take somebody like Arnold Schwarzenegger, who started off as a bodybuilder, morphed into an actor, morphed into a politician.
To a Terminator.
Right, now he's back into acting again, and who knows where he's going next.
So I am a Muslim Egyptian, and I want to play down my Arabness. Do I pass for a white person?
And here we go. Here's where things get ridiculously cringeworthy. Just watch Kevin's facial expressions here as Bassam asks him these questions. If you want to think that people don't police their own language to avoid saying anything that someone might use in order to weaponize their self-generated offense, just watch how carefully this man treads for the rest of the entire segment. Now look at this smug, patronizing look that we get from Bassam while Kevin sits here, under the gun, trying to think of something to say, anything to say, that isn't going to land him in the eye of a social justice warrior's shitstorm. Poor fucker. Never knew what he'd gone and gotten himself into before it was too late.
In terms of,
Can I pass for an Italian?
yeah, why not?
Okay, so at least after Bassam sends Kevin up shit creek in a leaking canoe, he tosses him a paddle. But this is ridiculous. And once the paddle's thrown, Kevin, being the unaware patsy that he is here, immediately snatches at it in the hopes of saving face. But of course, that's just setting him up for another ambush.
Okay.
I bet you half the people you meet already think you're Italian.
No.
No?
No.
Well, I mean, that's a way you could go if you wanted to.
Oh, Madonni. Oh.
You know?
Oh.
Okay, I'll work on the Italian.
Just to inject a little self-awareness into this video, since this is something that it's obviously so desperately in need of, in a video that seems to be looking for a way to stop profiling and stereotyping, Bassam goes right to the Italian caricature with his language and gestures. It's almost as if he's never really sat down and just thought, do the things I say reflect on myself? Am I just projecting my own issues onto others in a vain attempt to shield my ego? What I'm saying, of course, is not that you're going to come to the realization that the way you're pushing your agenda is directly opposed to the things your agenda campaigns against.
In the meantime, I wanted to see what's working for other Arabs who have been here for a bit.
Yeah, one of the things that most people will realize keeps them out of the spotlight and helps them to blend in is to just shut the hell up and get on with your business. If you keep your head down, work hard, and adopt the when in Rome mentality, you'll do just fine. It's not the Arabs who come to the US, learn about the culture, head out to baseball games, bake apple pies, and fly the stars and stripes that bother people. It's the ones who bring Islamic ideologies with them that directly oppose modern Western values.
Where are you originally from, Yusuf?
Jordan, Palestine. I don't know what you want to call it.
All right, so you're an Arab.
Yes.
No, you're not.
Yeah.
You don't look Arab. You're tall in your hair and you're from Dallas. You're not.
And I have no hair on my chest.
You do,
Look at this guy. Look at this glorious bastard. He's sporting a Dallas Mavericks shirt, the shades, he's smiling. He's got the boy band reject haircut. Dude's American as fuck, full stop. The average person walking down the street, the average sane person walking down the street, isn't going to take issue with this guy unless they're a San Antonio Spurs fan, in which case there might be some issues. But even then, if this guy and some other person get into it in the middle of the street over which basketball team is better, setting aside the fact that basketball was invented by a Canadian, that'd be one of the most American scenes ever.
We hear an explosion, or we hear like a bombing somewhere. First thing that comes into your mind?
I wish it's not affiliated with Arabs.
Exactly.
And yet we know, beyond a reasonable margin of error, that if there's been a bombing somewhere in the world over the last, 20 years, that it's probably going to have some Muslim connections to it, if we're putting things lightly. If you want to look at the bombings that have happened around the world in just the last 2 decades, not just in one country or another, but rather around the globe, the group with the single most bombings carried out by their members is going to be the Islamic religion. I'm sorry, Bassem, that people from your region seem so intent on using violence to get their way and on fighting amongst themselves over petty religious differences, but that's just the way it is right now. If you want to rebrand Arabs, then you're going to need to start at the source of the issue.
It's shock value. It gets attention on TV, gets ratings up. There'll be more shootings and deaths in Chicago and LA this week, and there'll be more deaths by ISIS in the whole year.
And even then, you'll get Black Lives Matter rioting because a black criminal was shot by a black cop after the black criminal pulled a stolen gun on the black police officer. With that being said, seemingly well-intentioned Mavericks fan, which issue do you think is the greater threat to international security? How many gangs in LA have gone off and rammed planes into office buildings, killing 3,000 plus people in the names of their values? How many of these criminals are legitimately looking to impose their religion on the entire world? Exactly.
So what should we do to change our image in the American media?
Get it more assimilated.
How did you get assimilated? Did you get an operation, you got taller, get like your...
No,
is that keratin? What do you do?
There's a lot of keratin in my hair, but
Yes.
I just think the first generation has a hard time assimilating.
Okay, I'm calling this guy Based Mavs fan from here on out because he's really starting to hit the key issues here, whether he knows it or not. Yes, the first generation of immigrants, the ones who actually left one country in order to live in another nation, typically have the toughest time assimilating into the culture of the nation to which they have moved. These people face cautious residents of their new nation who are unsure what to make of the new arrival, while at the same time the immigrants themselves can be very skeptical of others because they have different cultures and the two groups have spent the majority of their lives being socialized by different systems. Basically, the longer you have lived under a particular system or within a different culture, the longer it will take you to adjust to the new one. This acclimating timeline is inversely proportional to the amount of time that the person who has immigrated spends around people who have either already assimilated into society or who grew up in that society. On to Based Mavs fans' next point.
The Italians had a hard time back in the 1910, 1915. They had a hard time. The Germans too, and it's the second and third generation assimilates better.
See? There it is. Less time you spend around the culture of the nation your family emigrated from, and the more time you spend in and around the culture of the nation to which your family has immigrated, the better you will fit into the new culture and society. This brings me to a major issue with the current immigration proposals and the migrant and refugee crises, which is that these groups, when allowed to immigrate in large numbers over a substantial period of time, group together and retard the assimilation process. Based Mavs fan has touched on this a bit with his references to the turn-of-the-century Italians and Germans, but it happens with basically every national group that immigrates in waves. These immigrants find people from their home country and stick together, insulating themselves from outside influence. As I've pointed out before, this lengthens the assimilation timeline, in some cases essentially negating the assimilation process altogether when communities become more and more self-sufficient in terms of goods and services, cultural practices, etc.
Wait for 2-3 generations? Ain't nobody got time for that.
Bassem, while I applaud your apparent desire to adjust more quickly to your new country, you have to realize that the multi-generation assimilation process is the most natural, the most organic, if you will, and seems to have the most substantial impact and the lowest rates of cultural relapse.
What's an Arab to do? Thankfully, I found someone out there who wears the Arab brand like a badge of honor. And he's not even an Arab, he's Persian.
Just so everyone watching and listening understands the basics here, Persians are essentially Iranians who speak the modern Persian language, which is already very closely related to the Iranian language. So yeah, Persians are quintessentially Iranians. From what I can tell, Persians are to the Iranian identity what the Quebecois are to the Canadian one. One exists as a part of the other, but with a couple of distinct differences, primarily that of language. Even in this comparison, though, the Persian and Iranian languages are far closer to one another than English and French. Either way, let's get on with this farce.
You are the experts.
Yes.
On how are Arabs being portrayed in the movie.
Yeah, well, I wrote the book on the subject.
Yes, not a terrorist, but I have played one on TV. What kind of terrorist do you usually play?
Obvious product plug is obvious, but go on.
I played one that was an Afghan, not an Arab. He was working for an Osama bin Laden type guy. I did the terrorist driving a nuclear bomb around.
Oh, that's new.
Yes, halfway through the mission, my terrorist had a change of heart.
Notice how Bassem has switched back to Middle Eastern-y here, as opposed to Arab? I know I keep harping on this point, but if you're going to engage with someone on a topic, it is extremely important that you have them define their terms so that they can't weasel out of criticism later on when what they've said has been brought to light. If someone is going to make a statement, be sure that you can hold them to it or criticize the statement without getting bogged down in the semantic mud. Oh shit, dude was on 24. Loved that series back in the day. Fun fact, Kiefer Sutherland? Canadian. I know, right? No one expects the Canadian guy to run around saving the world, so they made him into an American. But that's just what Hollywood does. Actually, that little tangent brings me around to a legitimate point, shocking I know, about the portrayal of certain groups on TV and in the movies. That point being that if you go to other countries around the world, especially places like Turkey or China, you'll see some of the most overt, zero fucks given racism that you'll ever witness in your entire life. Just look at how other ethnicities are presented in Bollywood or Turkish cinema, or in Chinese movies where they get Koreans to play Japanese characters because they figure that either no one will notice or that no one will give a shit. Stereotyped portrayals of ethnic groups isn't something that's specific to Hollywood, even though Bassem seems to be working pretty hard to paint that particular picture. I guess that's okay though, just as long as he doesn't paint a picture of Muhammad. You know, because that can get you blown up or riddled with bullets from the AK-47s of Islamic militants.
I played the scientist that was putting the bomb together.
Scientist terrorist.
It was the scientist terrorist.
See, we're not just portraying Muslims as ignorant savages. Shit, they had this guy playing a scientist. Sure, okay, the guy was a terrorist scientist, but that's still a scientist, right?
Which part paid for the patio? The terrorist scientist?
Yeah, the terrorist scientist was a good start. That gave me a few $1,000s.
What is the most Middle Eastern-y lines do you remember saying?
So here we can see once again that it's really not the Arab issue, but the Middle Eastern issue that Bassem needs to confront. And the Middle Eastern issue is Islam. Plain and simple. The vast majority of the region follows a religious ideology that encourages violence against non-believers, advocates for the death penalty through stoning for female adulterers who don't stand a chance at trial because they require something like 4 witnesses in a rape trial and their testimony is only considered to be worth half that of a man's, and that throws people off of rooftops to their deaths for being gay. Bassem, the issue is not that you come from Arabia, but rather that you come from an area in the world where Islam is the reigning ideology and where human rights violations are commonplace, and they're sanctioned by Islam.
I did have a chance to say Allahu Akbar.
Okay.
Just as I was about to try and shoot Chuck Norris,
Yeah.
but he shoots me before I even get the full statement out. So I basically got Allahu Ak, and that was it.
You know, I just never thought of that. Using Chuck Norris, the great Walker Texas Ranger, to combat ISIS and the spread of Islam as an ideology? And it'd probably take him like 15 minutes. And he'd spend 14 minutes of that time drinking beer and eating bacon.
What kind of tips can you give me?
First of all, I think you've got great eyebrows for that,
Yeah.
for the terrorist parts. So when you go into auditions, you keep that eyebrow, you don't trim it at all.
Okay, so I thought we were here for Bassam to learn how to better assimilate into American culture, not how to perpetuate stereotypes about Muslims or make them even more prevalent. Bassam, you really need to just take a stance here, buddy, and stick with it.
Should I link it? A unibrow.
Let me just put it to you this way. If you link it, I'm gonna estimate you'll probably book 8 out of 10 at least. Let the beard grow a little bit and frown a lot.
Now, this whole bit just gets more and more cringeworthy as we go along, so I'm going to minimize the exposure time and fast forward through it. As with every other episode, I encourage you to check out the original video on Fusion's channel so that you can watch it uninterrupted just how they want you to see it, so that you can take what I've said, watch their original material, and draw your own conclusions on the matter, whatever those may be. Video warp speed, engage.
If you really want to go for it, then you look at one of the people that's casting, you just say Jew. Just say it. Yeah, say Jew. Even if they're not Jewish. Even if you guys black, you say Jew. You just throw it out there, right? Be loud, very loud. Even if they've written a love scene for terrorists, which they never have. You gotta say, I love you. You want to say, I love you. I'm going to kill myself. I love you so much. Like, you just want to kill myself. The word kill should play a lot in improvise.
So that's the secret. I don't need to rebrand myself. I don't even have to try to pass for an Italian.
Well, yeah, I'd actually recommend that you don't try to pass for Italian, because at some point they might want you to eat pepperoni or salami or some other pork product, and we all know that's not gonna fly.
I can just be your version of me. Arab terrorist number 5. America.
Dollars to donuts, those are either props or at worst a pair of airsoft guns, but I'm going to have to stop you right there with a trigger warning. A trigger discipline warning, that is. Look, I don't expect you to understand any of what I'm about to say here, but keep your goddamn booger hook off that fucking bang switch. I know this is often a cliched gun forum or photo comment, but it's true. People who don't know what they're dealing with when it comes to firearms tend to have piss poor trigger discipline. You've already done a video where you visit gun stores and a gun show, and you're going to tell me that in all the times you posed, not a single person thought it fit to straighten you out on the topic of trigger discipline. You keep your finger off of the trigger until you are good and ready to pull it. That's just some entry-level firearms knowledge. And to have a platform like yours that opposes Second Amendment rights while simultaneously providing such a poor example of gun handling, honestly, it's pathetic.
I love you.